Well, thank you so much for joining us for today's Hootenanny. And just sitting here, let me just thank you for something a while ago. Thank you for singing. I mean, just recently I was visiting with a family that's been visiting here. In fact, they're part of our discovery class. And one of the things that they said that has been a blessing is that so many places they've gone that as there's worship going on, there's people on stage that are singing, but you aren't. And I was just thinking this morning sincerely, it is a blessing to be here, and I am so grateful that God could have sent me a stack of places, but I'm glad that He led me here, and so grateful for this church, and I'm grateful for what God's doing here, leading Discovery this morning, and just a reminder again of the blessing that it is that we have in experiencing life as part of this church family. So sincerely, as you count your blessings, I hope that your church family is certainly high on that list. Anyway, with the start of the pandemic, there were a whole slew of behaviors that changed. Behaviors on the part of people, behavior on the part of individuals and families, but also change in behavior in terms of how businesses operated, especially those that are restaurants. And once the lockdown started, restaurants, unless they could do carry out, they couldn't operate at all. And so because of that, you started seeing some businesses that previously, or some restaurants that previously had not been doing carry out or delivery, that type of thing, they started pivoting and shifting more towards that. And then people just started, they get tired of eating at home, and you go to the grocery store and you can't find stuff, and everybody's hoarding toilet paper and you don't have anything to eat except that. And so people start, they're going to, you'd see these lengthy drive-through lines everywhere because people they just want something different. They want to go to a restaurant. And so one of the restaurants, obviously, that people go to, one of the fast food places with a drive-through that people go to is Chick-fil-A. And of course, we know that is Jesus Chicken because they're closed on Sundays, right? And so, anyway, I am a fan of Chick-fil-A. I do like Chick-fil-A. It's not my favorite, but I like Chick-fil-A. I think they've got a good product. I think they charge too much for their product. If anyone from Chick-fil-A is listening, you can, and get rid of the kale. Kale is terrible. Anyway, but I'm a fan of Chick-fil-A, And I remember going to the Chick-fil-A closest to us one day, and I decided I just would like to have that for lunch or whatever it was that meal I was going to have. And I go to the one over here on Wendover. And as I try to get in the parking lot, and I say, try to get in the parking lot, I can't even get in the parking lot because the dining room is closed, but there is this, it looks like a snail that is wrapped around this building, just slap full of cars. I didn't even begin to try to count. I mean, it was dozens and dozens of cars, and I'm thinking, I like Chick-fil-A, but I don't like it that much. And I look just down the bottom of the hill, and I see Bojangles. Now, Bojangles has like 2 cars in it. All right, I realize it's lunchtime, and those folks have been sitting there for breakfast, but it's just 2 cars. Just 2 cars that are sitting there. And so finally, after seeing this at Chick-fil-A, I decide that I'm going to go to Bojangles. Now, the service at Bojangles is terrible, pitiful, horrible. Again, if you're watching with Bojangles, get in the game. It's terrible. Anyway. But I go to Bojangles, and I think that they have a product that's not as good, and they have service that's terrible, but I went there because they had a drive-thru that was shorter. Why? Because I chose, and I decided that day, I'm not going to wait. And I did not wait for 2 reasons. I did not wait because I didn't have time. I mean, probably an hour, I guess, the drive-thru at Chick-fil-A. I didn't have time for that, but also because I was okay with what was available. I didn't think Bojangles is as good, but it's good enough. And so I'm okay with what's available. And so I decided I'm not going to wait. Why? Because I don't have enough time, and I'm okay with what's available. Hold that thought for just a moment. If you are someone that has a relationship with Christ and say, I'm one of His followers, and if you take that relationship with the Lord seriously at all, and you want to involve God in the daily goings-on of your life, one of the things that you have and one of the things that you will continue to discover is that you're going to find yourself at crossroads where you're waiting on God to do something. Maybe it is that you're waiting on God to give you an answer. You're trying to decide between this one and that one. It's not between good and bad, but it's between maybe what looks like both bad or both good. And you're praying that God might show you, that he might open the right door. Or maybe it is that you're praying about a relationship and that God might grant clarity, or that God might bring you into a relationship. Some of you might be, as a couple, struggling with the prospect of having children. You're praying and asking God to bring children into your life. And so there's all of these things that we have, that where we find ourselves, we're asking God to do X, Y, or Z. We're asking him to guide us in particular ways, and there's not an immediate response. And we find ourselves waiting. And what do we think about waiting? We don't like it. What do we like waiting on? Nothing. We don't like waiting at the doctor's office. We don't like waiting at the DMV. We don't like to wait to go into a meeting. We don't want to wait for a Zoom call to begin. We don't want to wait for anything. We don't want to wait for the light to turn green. We don't want to wait for anything. We loathe, just as people, and it's true of us even as believers, we loathe waiting. Yet it is, as followers of Christ, that we are going to find ourselves of necessity and by necessity having to wait on God, but we'll struggle with that. And many times what we will do is that we will decide, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to go ahead and do something. Why will we do that? Why is it that we will decide, I'm not going to wait on God? It's the same reason that I went to Bojangles. What makes me prone not to do this? The same reason. Because I think I don't have enough time, and because I'm okay with what's available. You say, well, Michael, are you just dreaming this stuff up? No, I believe that we see that illustrated even for us in God's Word. Look with me in your Bibles today to Genesis chapter 16. Genesis chapter 16. We're going to read the first 6 verses, but what we are going to pay attention to, though, is going to involve more than just what we see in those 6 verses. But Genesis 16, we're going to read these first 6 verses. This comes as part of a new series that we're beginning today, thinking about this whole experience of waiting on God. And so again, the question, why do we find ourselves, why are we prone not to? Look with me in verse 1. It says that Abram's wife Sarai had not borne any children for him, but she owned an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her I can build a family. And Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife for him. This happened after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan 10 years. He slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. When she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress became contemptible to her. And Sarah said to Abram, you are responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and when she saw that she was pregnant, I became contemptible to her. May the Lord judge between me and you. We'll pick up the rest of the story here in just a minute. But that leads us back to our question we want to think about, which again is this. What makes me, what makes you, what makes any of us as followers of Christ prone to not wait on God? We're going to have to. What makes us decide I'm not going to do that? Well, the first reason is because we think, or we tell ourselves, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. Now, for what we're reading here to make some sense, you need some backstory. And let me just say also, you read these names, Abram and Sarai, and you're like, who exactly is that? In case you forget, this is what their names were before God changes their names. We know them later as Abraham and Sarah. So for clarity's sake today, I'm just going to call them Abraham and Sarah. So what happens is that if you go back to Genesis chapter 12, God establishes this covenant relationship with Abraham, where he says that I will be your God, you will be my people, and I'm going to use you to be the father of this great nation. Maybe you, for example, remember as a kid learning that little song, Father Abraham had many sons, and I am one of them. Left arm, don't do that now. Anyway. But you remember that. That's because of this covenant relationship that God begins with Abraham. When Abraham hears this, and God says, I'm going to make a great nation out of you, it's describing the fact that there is going to be progeny, that there are going to be children. But he doesn't have any children. Sarah doesn't have any children. It seems that she is barren and incapable of carrying a child. Not only that, not only is she barren, but Abraham is 75 years old. Sarah is 65 years old. So you're going to have a baby. How many of you that are 75, we got some 75-year-olds in this room, how would you like How would you like, oh, you're going to have a baby. You'd spit your teeth out on that, wouldn't you? I mean, anyway. But he's 75. She's 65. She's on Social Security. I don't think Medicare has a maternity benefit. Right? So we're going to be the founders of this great nation. That's saying somehow, some way, God is going to do something. And if we are to have children, the only way that is going to happen is because God is going to have to do something. Perhaps it is in your circumstance, you realize the only way I'm going to know what to do is because God does something. The only way that I'm going to see health restored in this relationship is because God does something. And even though the specifics of your circumstance are different than that of Abraham and Sarah, in form, it's similar. The only way that something can happen is if God does it and you start waiting. And so he begins to wait. And so it is not simply that he waits and she waits for a month or two, for a season or two, but by the time we get to chapter 16, it's been 10 years. They're 86 and 76 years old at this point. Now, any of you 76-year-old women today, how many would you love to be great with child today? You'd say, yeah, no one is signing up for that today. But between chapter 12 and chapter 16, 10 years have passed, and they've been waiting. But they decide what? We're not going to wait anymore. We're not going to wait anymore. In fact, even before then, God had Abraham make this suggestion. I'll tell you what, I am old. How about with maybe I adopt my servant Eleazar, and I'll just make him our adopted son, and then then that's where the progeny, that's where the generations will come from adopting him into the family. And God says, no, you're going to have one that's going to come biologically through the two of you. Okay, tick-tock, tick-tock. And so they are waiting. And they're waiting year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10. And so that leads us to this. And Sarah says, since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. It's interesting how she phrases that, isn't it? It's kind of God's fault that I can't have kids. She says that, and then she says, why don't you take my slave, why don't you take my servant, Hagar? Apparently she is, we don't know how old she is, but she's of normal childbearing years. Why don't you take her, and with her you can conceive a child? And it's interesting, Abraham is old at this point. He's 86 years old. And his wife says, hey, why don't you go hook up with my servant? Excuse me? What did you say? Why don't you take Hagar and see if by that means we might be able to have children? Now, in response to that, does Abraham at all say, time out, Sarah, listen, I appreciate your desire. You've got the same desire that I do. I want what God wants for us. I want us to be able to see children come into this world, and I want God to use us to do what he's promised he was going to do, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wait on God. Do you see him saying that at all? Is there any hint of that? No, in fact, none at all. But why in the world would they decide we're just not going to wait? Again, Abraham is 86 years old. Sarah is 76 years old. And even though the text doesn't tell us, I've got to be thinking, they were thinking, the clock is ticking. And we are near the end of the roll of paper. Don't get some bad ring. I don't. So that they are saying, I think in their minds, all right, I know what's going on here. I mean, we are old. If this is going to happen, God's not doing something, so we had better just go ahead and do something. So we're not going to wait on God, and we can't wait on God because I don't think, you don't think, we don't think that we have enough time. We're too old for this to happen, and so we had better just go ahead and do something. They acted because they decided they did not have enough time. I remember when I got my first cell phone, I had graduated from college and had begun in seminary at that point, and I was driving back and forth between Charlotte and Wake Forest, and I got a cell phone. It was with, I think it was Singular at that point, and then AT&T. I don't know. You remember, some of you, Singular. Anyway, I got the phone at that point, and it was in part because it was a pretty good deal, because every month for $20, you got to use that phone for 50 whole minutes. 50 whole minutes, which is like double what everybody else was doing. So I'm like, let me sign up for this. 50 whole minutes. And so I got this phone, and there were some instances where I would use it. And so, like, for example, if I were coming home, I might call my parents and say, hey, I'm let you know I'm leaving now. I'll see you in 3 hours. And then I'd hurry up and hang up the phone. But I never called and, like, talked to anybody. Why? Well, the primary reason was this. I never really knew how many minutes I had. And if you've only got 50, especially spread out over a month, how many did I use the other day? Because if you cross over into the next minute, whether you use 1 second or 59 of them, you use that, they count that as a minute. So I didn't use it because I knew once you cross over that, it gets so expensive. It gets so expensive. They're going to really bleed you with overage if you go over 50 minutes. So I wouldn't use it. Why? Because I didn't know how much time I had. I didn't know how much time I had. Can I just be very plain with you and say this? About you, about me, about your spouse, about all of us, we don't know how much time we have. You don't know how much time you have. You don't. Is it a little? Is it a lot? Is it somewhere in the middle? I don't know. I don't know. But here's the reality. The Bible tells us that God knows the end of our days when? From the beginning. That the one who made me knows how my story here ends and when it ends. He not only knows the end of my days from the beginning, he knows the number of hairs on my head. He knows that level of detail about me. So keep in mind, I'm having to wait on one who's told me the answer is going to come. What you're looking for, that's going to come, but you've got to wait. God told them they were going to have this child. The only way that could happen is that God would miraculously work and cause her at this advanced age to be able to conceive. And she decides, oh, I've waited 10 years. I can't wait anymore because I don't have much more time. I'm running out of time, so I had better act as if God didn't know how much time she had. You know, at the end of the day, when you and I choose, and keep in mind, that's what we're doing. When I don't wait, and when you don't wait on God for whatever it is that you're looking for, when I don't wait on that, I'm choosing not to. And I'm choosing not to many times because of a self-assessment of the amount of time that I have, not just in life, but the amount of time before this action takes place, before this closing, before this occurs, as if we know it and God doesn't. My encouragement for you is simple. And I'm preaching to myself as much as I am to you. Because it's easier to talk this than it is to do it. But if you will wait, if you'll wait, the wait will be worth it. It will. And even though from your perspective, because it's very limited, it looks like there's not enough time, God knows what time it is. He does. He knows what's going on in your circumstance. And so when you say, "Oh, I just got to do something. I've got to do something. I don't have enough time." It's because I think that, not because God doesn't know what time it is. We're prone not to wait because we think I don't have enough time, but also because we are content with what is currently available. We are content with currently available. And so Sarah suggests Abraham that he take her maidservant, that he take her slave, Hagar, and consummate a child, and conceive a child with her. I love that there's not a whole lot of description at the end of verse 2. It says, Abraham agreed to what Sarah had said. You think? He's probably thinking, are you kidding me? I'm 86, and she's not only giving me permission for adultery, it's like spouse-mandated adultery. That's like the best kind. Well, you know, I mean, if that's what you want. And so it says that Abraham took Hagar. She becomes a wife for him, and she becomes pregnant in verse 4. Problem solved, right? Because God said He was going to make a great nation out of us. We didn't have any kids, and so I'm old, you're old. I've never had a child. Doesn't look like it's going to happen. We better do something. And so, all right, this is the easy way to do this. Because, after all, I mean, Hagar's here. We know her. She's a known commodity to us. We already have a relationship with her. She's of the right age and stage in life for being able to do this. She's certainly is young enough to be able to raise this child to adulthood. And so I think for a whole host of reasons, that's just the best idea. We're not going to continue to wait on God. Yes, it would have been wonderful if God would have intervened. It would have been delightful if God had done what we kept waiting for 10 years to happen, but that hasn't happened, so we will make it happen, and this is how we'll do it. Is this the ideal? Is this what we thought it was going to look like when we started? Is this exactly how God said it was going to happen? No, it's not, but, it's okay. It's good enough. I went to Bojangles that day because it's good enough. I'm okay with what is available. Abraham and Sarah concoct this plan because they think, okay, it's what's here. We can make this work. We can make this work. Caroline and I just celebrated our 18th anniversary in October. And we went that night for to go out to dinner. We went to Green Valley Grill. That has become a special occasion restaurant for us. And it's not the most expensive place in town, but it's not a cheap restaurant to go to. But the food is ridiculously good. And so special occasions like that, we've been there a number of times. Now, our anniversary is on October the 16th, which in this area puts it around the time of the fall furniture market. And I don't know if you've ever tried to go out to a restaurant during furniture market, but it's difficult because you've got all these people from all over the world, and they've all got these daily stipends, and they're eating on the company dime, and so they're eating out at all these places, including nice places like Green Valley Grill. And so I had made reservations. This has been a couple years ago. I'd made reservations, and we get there, and the parking lot, like our anniversary on that day was like on a Thursday or something, so it's not a time that you would think a restaurant would be especially crowded, but this place was packed. And the parking lot was full, had to park well below the hotel there. And so we get up to the counter, and I said, so I had a reservation for whatever time it was. And they said, we have just gotten so swamped because of the furniture market. We're running a bit behind. But if you'd like, we have some seats available at the bar. And I said, no, we'll wait. We'll wait. Well, that was first available. But I said, we'll wait. Well, I didn't want to sit at the bar for a variety of reasons, one of which, it's our anniversary. At the very least, you ought to look at each other while you're having dinner, right? I think there's a rule about that. So, like, if you're just sitting there beside each other, that's a lousy way to do this. And there's all this distraction, there's TVs, I just didn't want that. But the other thought was this. This meal is not inexpensive. And if I'm paying a premium price for it, I don't want to have a substandard seat. I want to get a good seat for a premium price, and so I'll wait. Understand what I'm saying here. There is a relationship between our estimation of cost and the extent to which we will wait. I decided I'm going to wait because the cost is so great. Now, if it was Steak and Shake, I don't care. But it's not Steak and Shake. My estimation of waiting was affected by my assessment of cost. Understand what was going on here. Abraham and Sarah decided we're not going to wait. We can't wait anymore, not only because we don't have enough time, but because they also did some cost assessment. And we are okay with what is currently available. And why do they think that? They think that because they think the cost is not so great. We can do this, and the consequences, very little, perhaps nothing. But look what happens as this passage follows. So the first thing that happens is that Hagar becomes pregnant. And when she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress became contemptible to her. So all of a sudden, there is tension between Sarah and Hagar that didn't exist before. And I realize this is a servant-master relationship, but even before then, it's likely that this was a hospitable relationship, that there was kindness, maybe friendship that existed between these two. But now that's out the window. And so these two don't like each other at all. And not only that, so there's trouble between Sarah and Hagar, but it continues. Sarah goes to Abraham in verse 5, and what does she say? She says, "You are responsible for what? My suffering. Here I am in my elderly status. I should be miraculously carrying a baby, but no. Why? Because you went and hooked up with Hagar." And now there's this tension, this misery between us. That used to be a great relationship. We used to get along fabulously, but now that's ruined, and this is all your fault because you did this. He didn't do this any more than Hagar had done that. But now there's marital problems. There's relationship problems between Sarah and Hagar. Did they ever think that was going to be part of the equation? No. Again, they did a cost assessment. This is not going to be any big deal. Hagar will effectively be kind of like a surrogate to us, and we'll fix this. But the passage continues. We didn't read this, but what happens is that, you see at the end of verse 6, it says, Sarah mistreated her so badly that she ran away. So Hagar gets out of town. She runs. And the angel of the Lord in verse 7 comes to her and says, "Hey, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And she says, "I'm running away from my mistress." And the angel says, verse 9, "Go back to her, submit to her authority." And then he says this, "I will," speaking on behalf of God, "I will greatly multiply your offspring. They will be too many to count." So from this, you're not going to have a child, but you're going to have children so numerous that they can't be counted. And then he says, "You have conceived and you're going to have a son." So there's no ultrasound, but he's saying you're going to give birth to a son. You're already carrying a little boy in your body. And you will call him Ishmael, a name that means God heard, because, he says, God has heard your affliction. But he says in verse 12, "This man will be like a wild donkey. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. He will settle near all his relatives." Now, he's saying, you're going to have this son. His name is going to be Ishmael, and he's going to be the leader of a great nation. A great lineage is going to come from you through him. And he's not going to get along with those that he's among. He is going to be numerous. He's going to settle among his relatives. That's talking about those that are going to come from this other line. What is that? Well, this is the birth of the Arab people. As a people group, this is where they get their start. I don't know if you've paid attention to news over the last, 1,000 years? Arabs and Jews don't get along today. And it doesn't make any difference who's negotiating from the White House. They don't get along. There is this intense animosity on both sides. Loathsome relationship between each other. And where is this concentration of Jews and Arabs? In the same area. This tells us at the beginning of the story, this is how it's going to be. But did Abraham and Sarah think that's going to happen? No, they never saw that on the horizon, never saw that as a possibility. All they did was to say, all right, we have a problem, we've talked to God, we've waited a while, but we can't wait anymore because we don't have enough time, and what's available is, it's not ideal, it's not the best, but it's good enough. Because the cost, it's not going to cost us that much. But it cost Abraham and Sarah in terms of their relationship. It cost Sarah and Hagar in terms of their relationship. And think of all the animosity. Think of all the people whose lives have been lost because of the constant ongoing conflict between Ishmael's line and the Jews to this very day. Oh, didn't see that coming. Maybe, just maybe, they should have waited, because the one who made them knew what time it was. But they decided, I don't have enough time. And what's available is good enough. They should have waited on God. Let me ask you today. First of all, are you waiting on God for anything? It's entirely possible that you would say that for a couple of reasons. One, you haven't involved him in the affairs of your life and the daily goings-on of living. Or maybe because, candidly, even if you have a relationship with him, you don't think, pause long enough to say, God, what would you want me to do? How would you want me to respond? Which path do you want me to go? The reality is, if you're following Jesus at some and at multiple points and regularly, you're going to need to wait on God. And I promise you, the wait is going to be worth it. Will you bow your heads with me?